America, my name is Osei-Frimpong, and we're doing the Black Athenians tonight. And it's going to be great because we're going to talk about the use and abuse of history for justice. Because a lot of people tell a lot of stories about themselves and their people that might not be true. First of all, I want to apologize for last week's show. I rewatched it to make sure that I comported myself in a way that's appropriate for the dignity of the work that I'm doing. And I realized that my California aspect came out, and I say like a few too many times, and I say too many times. So this broadcast, I'm going to make a serious effort to respect my viewers by expunging those two ill locutions from my presentation. So this will be a presentation without the word like and the presentation without the word It's going to take a lot of brain power, but I'm going to do my part for you, and you're going to do your part for justice. So, first, I want to start off by saying there's a great little essay by a guy named Friedrich Nietzsche called The Use and Abuse of History for Life. And I'll say that again. His name is Friedrich Nietzsche. A lot of vowels, a lot of consonants. And the essay is called The Use and Abuse of History for Life. And it starts out with the idea that thank goodness we could forget. Thank goodness we could forget, because if we couldn't forget, we'd be so embarrassed by, 13-year-old irony that I would be horrified and mortified that I wouldn't be able to act out into the world anymore. I'd be so embarrassed by my previous self, and if it was all in my mind, that I would not be able to act out in the world. So if we couldn't forget, we'd be too embarrassed to act forward. So I want to keep that in mind. I think that's a pretty important insight into our situation. Also, there was a video I did with Linda Lloyd, and you can find on thefunkyacademic.com. Actually, if you can find the name page, pull it down there. I'm going to call for the opening pretty soon, too, so get ready. There's a video I did with Linda Lloyd wherein, when I was packing up, I asked her, so what did we forget? Linda Lloyd runs the Economic Justice Coalition, the fantastic group that does actually really good work in Athens, Georgia. I asked her, where did we screw up? And she looked at me and she said, irony, we thought we overcame. And to which I agreed. And it might just be that simple. Too bad I didn't get it on camera. The good stuff always comes when you're packing the stuff up and then putting it down. But the interview with Linda Lloyd is fantastic. You can find it on my channel. And with that, I'm going to say, Matthew, hit the beat.
To the beat, y'all.
Yeah. Sound good to me. Never change the ways for the world or the government. If I was the president, then I would state facts. You leave it up to me, I paint the White House black and ain't no feature in your front.
All right, so here's the deal. I've also been given a Facebook holiday, not by my design, so I'm going to need you to tweet this out because I set up another profile, but that profile doesn't have as many people. My people don't know that I'm going, so I need you to tell them. So I need you to tweet this video out and share it on your Facebook that I'm doing a show because it's going to be very good. It's going to be on the use and abuse of history for justice and the stories we tell ourselves about justice, about history that may not be working for us, and the stories we're told about ourselves and about history that may not be working for us. So I'm going to start this broadcast off by reminding people that the goal is conversion, not coercion. We can't coerce people into doing justice by us if we do it right, but we can convert them into doing it by showing our humanity and showing their inhumanity and actually controlling the schools and the media. So the game is always in propaganda, putting helpful propaganda in there and taking away the harmful propaganda. Because as black people, unfortunately, we do not control, as we should, the production and distribution of anything in the United States, including the production and distribution of ideas, including ideas about ourselves. Right? So until we control the production and distribution of ideas, and corn and coal and energy, well, won't be free. So we need to start controlling the production and distribution of ourselves, of the ideas about ourselves, and that's why I do this broadcast. And I want to start off with people who took this seriously, took this project seriously. I'm going to start off with a video about the United Daughters of the Confederacy and how they controlled and produced ideas after the Civil War. Matthew, can you get the video? Mm-hmm. All right, go ahead.
Listen to how this textbook describes slavery.
The master often had a barbecue or a picnic for his slaves. Then they had a great frolic. Even while working in the cotton fields, they sang songs. The beat of the music and the richness of their voices made work seem light.
Yikes, that's from History of Georgia, a textbook published in 1954 that was taught across junior high schools in Georgia for decades. That sort of language is part of an intellectual movement called the Lost Cause, a distorted version of American Civil War history that's been prevalent in the South for a long time. It took shape soon after the defeat of the Confederate States in the war, when Southern historians like Edward Pollard and former Confederate General Jubal Early started preserving the South's perspective through their writings. They framed the Confederate cause as a heroic defense of the Southern way of life against the overwhelming forces in the North. That narrative has a few basic tenets: the glorification of Confederate soldiers who died for a cause they believed in, the belief that slavery was a benevolent institution, and maybe most importantly, that slavery was not the root cause of the war. The Lost Cause is one of the most notoriously effective efforts to rewrite history, and it was done by the losing side. So how did it become so deeply rooted in Southern memory? Blame the United Daughters of the Confederacy. The UDC was founded in Nashville in 1894 to preserve Confederate culture for generations to come. The women who made up the group descended from elite antebellum families, and they used their social and political clout to spread the pro-Southern version of the war as real history. You've probably seen their efforts to honor the Confederacy, but maybe you didn't know it was the UDC. They're the ones who covered the Southern landscape with memorials for Confederate leaders and soldiers. They used their fundraising and lobbying skills to pressure local governments into erecting monuments in prominent public spaces like courthouses and state capitals.
Installed here next to the state capitol by the United Daughters of the Confederacy.
The United Daughters of the Confederacy donated this memorial to the city back in the 30s.
They put them along roadsides and in parks. Any place that was remotely relevant to the Confederacy was memorialized. By the early 20th century, the UDC had 100,000 members and chapters spread all over the country, but mostly in former Confederate states. And there's a reason they grew so quickly during that time.
So we're talking about roughly 3 decades after the end of the war, and the Confederate veterans themselves are beginning to die off. So there is this push to find ways to commemorate it, because the big challenge by 1900 was there's a new generation of white Southerners being born, and they never experienced the war years.
That push is visible. Most of the Confederate monuments were erected during the UDC's height of influence.
There's a rhetoric around monuments that we want to get this thing built before all of that generation has died off. And the reason we want it is to teach future generations about those men.
Dr. Karen Cox wrote the book on the UDC, and I asked her if it was fair to say the group established the Lost Cause as historical fact in the South.
Oh my God, yeah. They were the leaders of the Lost Cause into the 20th century, and they made it a movement about vindication.
Just to give you an idea of how effective they were, they successfully lobbied for a Confederate memorial in Arlington National Cemetery, which U.S. President Woodrow Wilson proudly unveiled to a cheering crowd. Now that's influence, right?
Monuments are the least of what they did.
What?
I mean, they are the most visible and tangible, but the work with children was far more influential.
It turns out a central UDC objective is shaping how children think about the war and their Southern heritage. One of their most powerful tools? Textbooks. Take a look at this pamphlet called A Measuring Rod for Textbooks. It was written by the illustrious Southern historian Miss Mildred Rutherford, an educator, orator, and author of Southern history textbooks. She's also very pro-slavery. The pamphlet announced the formation of a textbook review committee featuring prominent Southerners like 5 former Confederate generals. This group was committed to spreading the truths of Confederate history, so they instructed school boards to reject any textbooks that did not accord full justice to the South. And they urged libraries to deface every book in their collection that didn't measure up by writing the words "unjust to the South" clearly on its cover. This pamphlet was shared widely with school boards throughout the South, and UDC-backed committees closely monitored history books to make sure Northern influence never reached classrooms. So the core language of an approved textbook aligned precisely with that of the Lost Cause. You know, stuff like,
"The Confederacy lost in the war between the states, but Georgia never forgot to honor her Confederate soldiers."
History of Georgia was on the UDC's approved list. It was also written by E. Merton Coulter, a self-described Southern historian and historian-described white supremacist.
They understand that how you educate, who wins the writing game, who wins the battle over history, ultimately wins the war. That's the big fight for the UDC.
But their work with children went further than the classrooms. The UDC formed an auxiliary group called the Children of the Confederacy, which was designed to get kids born in former Confederate states to actively participate in their version of history. Group leaders had kids recite call and response truths from something called the Confederate Catechism. Children up to the age of 18 would compete and be rewarded for memorizing long passages of lost cause rhetoric.
So it would be like an after-school thing, like that was your club. You would go after school to the meeting of the Children of the Confederacy, and your leader might teach you songs of the South, like Dixie or other songs that were considered Southern patriotic songs. They would have them write essays, go visit the veterans, and learn this catechism.
Children were also the centerpiece of their community's monument unveilings, like this living flag at the dedication of the Stonewall Jackson Monument in Richmond. Yes, those are school children. The UDC's efforts shaped the identities of children who grew up with the lost cause. They made history personal, and that made their story last longer.
Generations of children learning that narrative in a variety of ways grow up to be, segregationist in the 50s and 60s, because that's been drilled into them since they were children.
After World War I, the UDC started losing steam, but the damage was done. The monuments were in place, and the textbooks they wrote remained in Southern classrooms until the late 70s. And the women's group did it all without the right to vote or participate in politics.
You can still get glimmers of this lost cause memory of the war from people who will always choose to see it through the personal. And I think the UDC, to a great extent, that was their goal.
So the next time someone says the Confederate monuments are about remembering our history, just know that that's exactly what the United Daughters of the Confederacy wants you to think.
All right, so understand that they tailored the history curriculum for all Americans in order to make themselves feel good. That's what happens when you treat history as an implement for your own feelings. Right? That is what happens when you treat history as an implement for your own feelings. Can you turn me up a little? Yeah. So, understand the stakes of that. We might have won the coercive war, the Civil War, but we didn't take seriously the conversion. And compare this with Nazi Germany, where after the war, they took the denazification of Germany very seriously. That's why they didn't have a resurgence immediately of a neo-Nazi party. If they hadn't taken it seriously, the neo-Nazis would have been back in the 60s, and Germany wouldn't be what it is today. But in Germany, you don't find a statue of Goebbels. You don't find a statue of Hitler because they took denazification seriously. In the US, we did not take the conversion seriously. When we taught history, we let the racist side do it in a way that made them feel good about their grandparents and about their fathers. And it turns out that there are stakes, because notice what the first thing they lied about was the first thing that the video introduced. They lied about the working conditions of the slaves. Right? And understand that. The original lie is always going to be about black working conditions. Because insofar as a black identity is a thing, it's not about melon necessarily, it's about labor. It's about the exploitation of labor. And that's why being black in America is a class marker. I'm not saying that all black people are poor. But insofar as a black family is from the United States and has been here for a few generations, they come from exploited labor. And here's one thing you have to understand about class markers. People think class is just about money. It's actually, class is a matter fundamentally about where you come in the production of goods and services. So the ownership class is a different class from the laboring class, which is a different class, from the employee class is a different class, from the slave class, which is a different class. So, and then one reason we can talk about feminism as a class issue is because there's a lot of reproductive labor that's actually exploitative that women do that they don't get compensated for. And so we can think about feminism and women's rights as a class issue insofar as we talk about all of the reproductive labor, the cleaning, cooking, and childcare that's shunted on to women, but they aren't compensated for. That's why in a well-ordered world, when you talk about Mother's Day, we should be talking about public childcare. We should be talking about paying preschool teachers. We should be talking about, if it were up to me in a well-ordered world, like I said, if it were up to me, there would be house cleaners, unionized, paid the way we paid garbage collectors, right? They'd come in once a week, do a job very efficiently, and it would be a public-private or maybe all public good that everyone got, but they'd be paid. So that's what my feminism looks like. But it's a class issue, so we have to look at where you come in the production of goods and services. And black people, as black people in America, were always, as a class, slaves or enslaved labor. Right? That's why any racial justice movement that means anything is going to be real close to a labor movement. Right? This is why when King died, he wasn't dying for formal rights. He was dying for, can you give me the Memphis March? He was dying for, he was marching for sanitation workers. Right? Because any racial justice movement is going to be a labor movement. And I know those signs say, I am a man, and you're going to be like, well, that's anti-woman, because shouldn't it say I'm a person? Well, you have to understand that gender itself is a class marker, right? Slaves are like beasts of burden. They weren't gendered any more than you talk about donkeys and mules having a gender or work cows having a gender. So to be a slave is to be a genderless labor. And so to actually assert manhood is actually asserting personhood. And notice that the underlined is under am, not the man, it's under am. So they're saying what they are rights-bearing things. They're rights-bearing humans. But to be a rights-bearing human is to be a gender, and gender was actually denied of black men and black women. There's a great book on this by Melissa Stein, I want to say her name is. Yes, it is. It's called The Mismeasure of Man. Or The Measure of Man. Melissa Stein. She's a historian, I believe, out of Columbia. And notice the mismeasure of man. Notice the line is under the am because this is asserting that they actually have rights and should be treated like employees, not slaves. So it's not I'm a man, not a woman. It's I am a man, not a slave. Because the UDC did its job so well that black workers were still treated like slaves up until this was 1968. Remember, the Memphis March started because 2 workers died in a trash compactor to get out of the rain. Right? So that's what we're talking about. Treat me like a man, not treat me like a slave. But mostly what we're talking about is that any racial justice, any serious racial justice politics is a labor politics. And if you forget that, if you think it's just about hair care and food and music, unless the music is about working, you've got your racial justice politics confused in a fundamental way. If you think you can get to the root of racial justice and not talk about labor and black people as laborers, then you have your story confused. So when Linda Lloyd says, appropriately, our problem is we think we overcame, ask yourself, when was the last time you saw a prominent black person talk about labor politics? When's the last time you saw Oprah talk about labor politics? When's the last time you saw Barack Obama talk about labor politics? When's the last time you saw Michelle Obama talk about labor politics? When's the last time you saw a Negro you know and appreciate, and who's loved by everybody, talk about labor politics? When's Shonda Rhimes come out with a show about black people working? Jobs, right? When Kerry Washington wasn't a labor organizer, Olivia Pope was not a labor organizer, because that's the work. That's the work. And we lost our ball. We took our eye off of the ball like Remember, I'm trying to get through this show without saying like or too many times, so my enunciation might be a little bit stilted, but I'm trying to do it for you people and my own self-improvement. So, what we're trying to do is talk about black people as laborers. So how did we get the idea that we overcame? How did we get the idea that we overcame? We forgot that our labor conditions were not particularly good. We forgot our class. And when you forget our class, you really forget what it means to be black. And how did we forget our class? How did we forget what it means to be laborers? Well, the New Deal didn't help because that created, when white people wanted to be treated like employees, they revolutionized their government and they got what they needed out of the New Deal. It created the quality of labor laws they needed so that employees were not treated like slaves. White employees were not treated like slaves. White veterans, when they came back, were not treated like slaves. It secured the white middle class. We never got that. In fact, since FDR had to run that New Deal by Southern Dixiecrats, and he wasn't really about fighting us, because remember, he was Woodrow Wilson's Secretary of Navy. But since FDR had to run the New Deal by poor white Southerners, they wanted the Southern way of life, which means keeping black people at the lower class. So he secured the middle class by pushing black people into the lower class. And understand what that means. Even today, you see the remnants of this in law because the middle wage in Georgia is around $7.25. Can you double check that for me? It is $7.25. All right. So the minimum wage in Georgia is $7.25. But there are exceptions. There are exceptions, and that's what Broderick is saying. No, the black minimum wage is $5.15. So okay, yeah. So in Georgia, it's $5.15, but the federal minimum wage is $7.25. But Georgia gets an exception because of a few professions, pretty much the stuff we do. Farm workers, including the poultry plants, some factory workers, the waiter's wage is low. Pretty much where you find a congregation of black people, there's an exception. So the federal minimum wage is $7.25, but when it comes to Georgia, it's $5.15, and the Georgia has an exception from the federal statutes for a handful of occupations. And remember, in the 50s, up until the 50s, 75% of black laborers in the South were either farm workers or domestic help. So we were either picking stuff or doing windows. And there's nothing wrong with that if you're paid appropriately. But we've written in, both in the exceptions in Georgia law and the federal exceptions, that black people get paid less than other people. So pretty much in Georgia, minimum wage is $7.25 unless you're in black occupations, then it's $5.15. And that's a problem. And that's not something we hear enough of our black legislators and our black leaders talking about. Right? We should be talking about that. Honestly, we should be talking about that before we're talking about gun violence. Because if you give people jobs in black neighborhoods, they'll shoot people less. Turns out that labor policy, the black condition is a matter of labor policy, and that should be taken seriously. Also, remember, my Facebook is taken down, so I'm really going to need you to spread this video around more than I usually do. Spread it to all of your people, put it on your listservs. Watch this video in your book club or your sewing circle. Just have me talking in the background because it's very good. And now I'm trying to make it more pleasant on your ears by getting rid of my infelicitous linguistic tics. So I'm going to need you to share this around because I can't do this because since black people don't own Facebook, I'm still subject to Zuckerberg's whims. And I suspect that since the election season is upon us, and I have very strong and strident views about whom you should vote for, one of the opposing candidates' campaigns flagged my Facebook page, and now I'm in a 30-day hiatus from my Facebook advocacy. So I'm going to need you to show everybody this video because I can't do it myself anymore. Black politics is labor politics. We thought we overcame because what happened was and I've gotten this from a few sources. Lester Spence talks about this in his book, Knocking the Hustle. Michael Dawson talks about this. Grace Lee Boggs talks about this in her book. In all of these sources, they say what happened was a few black people made money after 1968. They started controlling the narrative in a way that forgot the black working poor. I'll say this again. A few black people got a little bit of money with our formal rights and got a little bit of power, and then started controlling the narrative in a way that forgot because they were ashamed. Because remember, this is stigmatized work. They're still fighting for their manhood. They were ashamed to admit that black people in the United States are stigmatized, are working poor. Black people, we are working poor. Now, everyone's going to say, like, well, I know an uncle who got no. 1% of black people in the United States have a wealth that's over $1 million. 15% of white people are worth over $1 million. That means you need to be the best black person to be worth over $1 million. Whereas white people, like, they have whole neighborhoods, 15 million of them. 15 million white millionaires, like whole entire neighborhoods, blocks, even cities, where everyone just kind of has $1 million. And that's like nothing. And they can walk in with $1 million and have their other white people talk to them like they're trash because the other white people have like $6 million. That means that hookup jobs come in the millions of dollars, networks of wealth. They're not talking about one white uncle who's doing fine. They're talking half my congregation are millionaires, whereas black congregation, they got like 2 black millionaire families, and anytime the roof gets a hole in it, everybody looks at them, and things get real tense. So that's the difference. So we are still, because we haven't gotten our politics right, we haven't overcame. We are still working poor. Had we stayed with the labor politics as black politics, like King knew, we wouldn't be in the situation we are right now. We wouldn't be in the situation we are right now. We wouldn't let people talk about Oprah Winfrey for president or Michelle Obama for president without knowing if they have a labor politics. We wouldn't have let Barack Obama go 8 years without talking about organized labor, without substantively talking about organized labor, without telling black people, you need to get in a union. Instead, we substituted black faces in high places for black politics for black labor. Labor is being treated well for black politics. You have to understand, especially union politics, because black people, you have to understand that, and Derek Hamilton and Sandy Darity, too. Derek Hamilton's an economist at the New School. Sandy Darity is an economist at Duke. They've come out with multiple report that says the private market does not absorb stigmatized workers. And that's what we are right now. Black people, we're stigmatized workers. So if you expect the private market to take care of us, it's not going to happen. That's why we are the most unionized demographic. Because in order for black people to stay on a job, not just get the job, but stay on it, especially if it pays decently, it's going to be a union job. Or like in a job where other people are unionized. So a nurse, it's going to be a black teacher. So even if you're not in a union, the only reason we pay nurses anything is because of other nurses' unions. The only reason we pay teachers anything is because of other teachers' unions. So even if you're not a member, you should organize to be one, because unions are what got you the quality of lifestyle you almost enjoy. And if Georgia had a stronger union culture, the teachers in Georgia would be paid more, and also, the nurses in Georgia would be paid more. Although the nurses do all right here, but they could be doing better because it's life-saving work. So we have a black politics that forgot the CNAs. We have a black politics that forgot the certified nursing assistants. That's the problem with our black politics. Somehow, after 68, we thought we overcame when we started throwing ourselves banquets rather than talking about unions. Throw ourselves a lot of banquets. We have image awards, and we need more substance awards. And the substance is, what are you doing for black workers, for black CNAs? Not getting black faces in high places. I remember at the 40s, I want a picture of Ralph Bunche, and the YMCA picture from 2 shows ago. We started substituting black faces in high places for a real black labor politics because we didn't understand that black politics is labor politics. And so I'm going to get a picture of Ralph Bunche. You might forget that Ralph Bunche was the ambassador to the UN. It was a big deal. Howard's got some stuff named after him. Ralph Bunche. You know what was happening while Ralph Bunche was the ambassador to the UN? And everyone was very proud. We've overcome. It's 1940. It's the mid-40s, late 40s, and Ralph Bunche is secretary of the UN. Give me the other picture now. The YMCA. Yeah, the YMCA one. At the same time that Ralph Bunche was the ambassador to the UN, you could have said we overcame and put that right below. Put that right below? Yeah. At the same time, this picture was taken in 1942. So you can have both black faces in high places and black babies being used as carnival fodder. You can have black faces in high places and black babies being used as carnival fodder. Now remember, this is the YMCA's, 1942, the YMCA's marketing material for their kids camp in Minnesota. All right? So someone had to take that picture, had to go through a committee, they put it on a brochure. So, blackface in high place. At the same time, the YMCA camp. So you can get those pictures away. So what I'm saying is we let black faces in high places screw up our politics. And this includes the blackface in high place we had for the last few years, President Obama. We let him not talk about laborers. We let him not talk about the state of the black worker. Or the fact that 21% of males, black males, in 2016 didn't work. And let's be honest, the ones who did, how were they doing? All right? So how did that happen? It's not that we thought we overcame. Who told us that we overcame? Who told us we overcame? Can you give me the Cosby's picture? So, you remember that Cosby episode where Bill Cosby and Claire Cosby talked about unions, talked about working people and working poverty? No. So when I say we took the eye off the ball, it's not just a Cosby show. But when I say we took the eye off the ball, we decided that real work, we inhabited, good. When we took our eye off the ball, we took on the class aspiration and the class politics of non-black working class people. And honestly, since the black race constitutes a class because we were brought over as exploited labor, we took on white politics and called it black politics. Insofar as we stopped doing working class politics, we stopped doing black politics. And that's important. That's how we got confused. Now, criminal justice is an issue, and you can do black politics and do criminal justice politics as a quality of black politics. But fundamentally, when we stopped worrying about CNAs, when we stopped worrying about people who do windows, when we stopped worrying about farm workers, when we stopped worrying about domestic helpers, when we stopped worrying about black exploited laborers, when we stopped worrying about cafeteria ladies and sanitation workers and certified nursing assistants, that's when we thought we overcame. We let the wrong people tell us what it meant to be black. So honestly, there are a lot of black leaders who are confused about what it means to be black. And you're confused about what it means to be black if you don't know what a union is. So if you call yourself a black leader and you don't know what a union is and why they're good for us, you're confused about what it means to do black politics. Right? So we got confused. We took on the class aspiration of people who weren't our class and they're not our class because our class is defined by our role in production. And in America, our role in production is exploited labor. So real freedom isn't becoming the next, I'm sorry, Beyonce, but real freedom isn't becoming the next Bill Gates. It's making sure that sanitation workers are getting paid $20, $25 an hour. They're getting paid like white plumbers. Right? It's making sure that people at the chicken plant are getting paid $20 an hour because they're working. And this is what Martin Luther King knew toward the end of his life. And in two speeches, one, Showdown for Nonviolence, and in The Other America, both speeches he gave before he died, he settled in on there is no such thing as menial labor. The orderly and the janitor and the sanitation worker at the hospital is just important as a surgeon, because if the sanitation worker doesn't do her job or his job, germs come. And if those germs come in your wound, the patient dies. So we need to respect the work of the sanitation worker in the hospital. That's in The Other America. And as soon as we stopped respecting that, and as soon as everybody wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, and we thought that was black life, we screwed up our black politics. There's no shame in being a sanitation worker, black people. There's no shame in being a bus driver. There's shame in the way we pay them and the way we don't let them organize, unionize, and advocate for themselves. Because that's why that's when white workers moved from being indentured servants to employees. Black people, we're still slaves, or we don't know what it's like to be an employee. We're still in vulnerable places. And if you're that vulnerable, you might as well be a slave. You're a tool of your employer. All right? So we got confused when we started worrying about images more than substance. When we started throwing banquets for ourselves and giving awards to ourselves rather than thinking, how are the CNAs doing? When we started worrying about black faces in high places rather than making sure that the black workers picking up stuff are getting paid fair and have dignity and have control over their schedules as they're picking up stuff. Because I need someone picking up stuff. I like the people picking. Thank you for the people picking up stuff. And I want to, and this is deep because we got close. Give me the picture of Rock. I'm going to show you another show from my youth, Rock. Now, Rock, now remember, Rock himself was a sanitation worker. And you might not know this. Rock himself was a sanitation worker. His lady was a nurse, and the father was a retired Pullman porter. I'll say that again. 3 black jobs. Sanitation, those are black jobs. Good middle-class black jobs. Sanitation worker, nurse, Pullman porter, and then out-of-work musician. Another black job. So with a complicated right. That's a black family. Problem is, we have black people doing black jobs. No talk about unions. How do you get someone who is a retired Pullman porter without an episode on A. Philip Randolph? By the way, A. Philip Randolph was the black labor organizer who not only organized the Pullman porters into a union and got them say in their working conditions and fair wages, he also organized the March on Washington for jobs and freedom. We know that march as the march where Martin Luther King had his dream, but it was a march about jobs. And the slogan for that march was civil rights plus full employment equals freedom. We got the civil rights, we got the form, but we didn't get the content, which is like the money, full employment, in order to get freedom. So we have the form of freedom. We have a lot of pictures, but not real freedom. And we forgot to advocate for the second part of that freedom, that content That's the money when we forgot that black politics is labor politics. So A. Philip Randolph. And then we had, like I said, Rock was a sanitation worker. We talked, in that show, they talked a lot about him being cheap. And they talked a lot about his personal spending habits being cheap and finding things on the route. But they didn't talk about how his union secured him a job. And also nurses. The reason why nursing is a middle-class profession is, one, white women started doing it. Two, the union. Because it was, as long as it was women's work, it still wasn't paid very well. It was the union that got nurses and teachers being paid as a good middle-class wage. So this household is made possible because of union work, but the people who watched Rock, myself being one of them, never learned about organized labor through it. So you can watch Rock, not learn about organized labor. You can watch The Cosby Show, not learn about organized labor. You can watch all of Shonda Rhimes' shows, not learn anything about organized labor. And you wonder why we think we've overcame. We overcame because we divorced black politics from labor politics. We don't make it until black workers working in all their jobs, and black workers do work, get paid a fair wage. And that's not actually going to happen just by raising minimum wage, because since the private market doesn't absorb stigmatized workers and we're still stigmatized workers, they'll just either find different people to do those jobs who aren't black, or they'll just have fewer jobs, right? So we need the federal job guarantee. This is what King was arguing when he was arguing for a federal job guarantee. This is what A. Philip Randolph was arguing when he was arguing for a federal job guarantee. This is even what FDR was arguing when FDR argued for a job guarantee. We need a federal job guarantee. And that federal job guarantee needs to come at real wages. Remember, FDR created 8.5 million jobs for mostly white people with his WPA and CCC. Not just picking up stuff and digging trenches, although we could use refitted septic tanks and pulling plumbing for the leaded houses. We could use those things. Flint, yeah. We could use, if we want to put black people to work doing that stuff, we could use that work. We could also use, like I said, digging trenches for get broadband all over the United States. We could use that work, but we could also use the cultural work. We need more black newspapers, black theaters. The WPA hired a lot of artists. So we could use that work in the community, and we cannot, and Derek Hamilton and Sandy Darity say this clearly, we cannot expect the private market to absorb black workers. So insofar as we have any rights, we need the means to exercise those rights, which means we need to be paid for our jobs. We do, and we also need to be hired. So when black politics started getting enamored with its own image and kind of flossing for itself, that's how we lost our way. That's how we became under the illusion that we ever overcame. Because if you look at the numbers, we don't have that much more than we had during slavery. I think it was 0.5% of the wealth of the United States had money during slavery, and now we're at like 1.5. Yeah, something like a little bit on a smidge over 1. So somehow we thought we overcame because we're doing it on credit. We're flossing on credit, what other people are paying for with cash and inheritance. What we need is land. What we need is wealth. What we need is jobs at fair wages, and we need to honor the work we do, because at the beginning of America, they didn't honor the work that black people do. And now, in 2018, we still don't honor the work that black people do. And that's fundamentally the problem. The difference is, unfortunately, we have a lot of black people telling other black people that the problem is with black people and the choices we make, not the fact that we work and don't get paid a fair wage to do that work. So any black politics that's not labor politics isn't a black politics that we need to be talking about right now. Or if you're talking about criminal justice as a black politics, you need to tie that into a labor politics. And the federal job guarantee actually does that insofar as anybody who gets let out of prison, they can get let out on Sunday, have a job Monday morning. And Martin Luther King was clear about this insofar as it's not about job training, it's about jobs. You give people jobs and train them on the jobs. You give people jobs and train them on the jobs. Jobs come first, job training can come on the way. Because if you tell people it's about job training, then they go to school for job training, they take out loans for job training, and then find out that the private market doesn't want them. And that's black life. And that's why black women are actually the most burdened with student loans in the United States. That's a demographic most burdened with student loans, black women. So if you want your feminist politics, fun, let's wipe off those loans. 2, we need to guarantee those sisters a job. Starting at $20, but if you go to school, it goes up. So insofar as we have rights, we need the means to exercise those rights. Insofar as we've confused our history, it's because we've confused our class position. We've forgotten that we're laborers and that we're employees and that a black politics that means something for black people is a labor politics. And honestly, I'm from California. Black people I know in California have money because they work union jobs, right? So it's your black lawyer, not your black lawyers, it's your black nurses, your black teachers, your black parole officers. That's the black money in California. It's people, about my mom's age. My mom's a nurse, went to Grady. First of all, my mom went to Grady and then moved to Atlanta and bought a house. We'd be, middle class or broke. But instead, she went to Grady, and she's of the generation where if you go to Grady and then move out to California and you buy a house in the 70s, the house appreciated. So it's got nothing to do with her training. It's about being her age in California and buying a house. So then she bought a house, now she retired, and she got to sell her house in California, moved to South Carolina, where California money means something. And now she's doing fine in South Carolina because she sold the California house, and she's a baby boomer. What little money we have is in baby boomers' hands. Black people, you don't know black people under 50 with money. Stop pretending. The black people under 50 you think have money, they don't have money. Or they have money, but they also have student loans that they haven't told you about. You think you know black people, and you don't know congregations of black people under 50 without money. All the black money is over 70. And a lot of it is union money from these jobs. And that's why we're downwardly mobile. There's a great article by Brookings. They came out with a piece that said 7 out of 10 black people. So if you just put in Brookings, downwardly mobile, or Brookings broke, 7 out of 10 black people born into the middle class are going to fall into poverty. Once again, that's 7 out of 10 black people born into the middle class are going to fall into poverty. We are downwardly mobile because we forgot that black politics is labor politics. And the people who control the ideas in the black community, what happened was they got a little bit of money and then thought they were white. They forgot that black politics is labor politics. They were looking at their own little professional circle and thinking, no, we all right. We all right. We're fine. Their own little families or the deacons at all the churches are looking at themselves, forgetting that the masses of black people are still working and they're working poor. All right? So thank you for your time. Once again, my Facebook is taken away. Also, if you like what I'm doing, I'm going to need you. Did you find the nameplate? Oh, yeah. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to need you, if you like what I'm doing, I'm going to need you to go to www.funkyacademic.com or www.thefunkyacademic.com and give a little bit of money. You can either give a one-time big donation, or you can give a monthly donation of $5, $15, or $50, or you can choose your amount. So please, I'd like to, start paying Matthew a little bit more, and I still have rent to pay on the studio every month, and I'd like to grow this, and we're moving into a hard press that I want to be able to produce and distribute. So please, if you like what I'm doing, go to thefunkyacademic.com, kick in for a monthly, $5, $15, or $50, or less or more, and tell your friends. If you're at HBCU or if you know people at HBCU, send this video around. Send this to all your sorority sisters and brothers and your book club, and watch this at your book club and talk about what I'm saying. It's not just that we thought we overcame. The question is, how did we get the idea that we overcame? Who produced that idea in us and distributed that idea to us? And share this video on your Facebook, tweet it out, on your listserv, and I will talk to you next week. All right, take care.